Admiral Zolth arrived on Earth with 3 more ships and enough scientists to fill a small city. The news of the Sol discovery had spread through the Vorthak fleet like wildfire, and everyone wanted to see the impossible human technology for themselves. But what they found in the following days made the first discovery look small and simple. Within a week, they had located similar chambers under every major human city. London had a facility 3 times larger than Seoul. Tokyo held technology that seemed to bend space and time. Moscow contained weapons that made Vorthak plasma cannons look like children toys. New York held the biggest surprise of all, a chamber so vast that their strongest lights could not reach the far walls. Engineer Bach had not slept in 4 days. The human devices he studied in the London facility made no sense at all. Their computers processed information faster than the best Vorthak quantum systems. But they had no visible processors, no circuits, no anything. That looked like technology. The machines seemed to think with materials that looked like black glass but felt warm and alive. The energy sources were even more impossible. They drew power from empty space itself, pulling electricity out of nothing, and converting it into usable energy with perfect efficiency. Bach had seen fusion reactors, antimatter engines, and zero-point generators, but nothing that simply made energy appear from nowhere. The human power systems violated every law of physics. He knew. But it was Dr. Lara who made the discovery that kept everyone awake at night. The genetic samples they found in the chambers did not match the human remains scattered across Earth's surface. The DNA was too complex, too perfect, too organized. It was as if someone had taken basic human genetics and improved them beyond all recognition. The dead humans they found in the ruins had normal DNA, 23 chromosome pairs, standard genetic markers, and the usual mix of beneficial and harmful mutations. But the samples from the chambers showed humans with 48 chromosome pairs, genetic sequences that seemed to repair themselves, and cellular structures that should have been immortal. These are not the same species, Lara reported to Admiral Zoth during the morning briefing. The humans who built these facilities were as different from surface humans as we are from primitive bacteria. Something changed them. Something improved them beyond anything we thought possible. Meanwhile, in the New York facility translator, June had finally broken through the human language barriers. Their computer systems used a form of communication that was part mathematics, part music, and part something that had no name in any known language. But once he cracked the basic patterns, the information flowed like water. What he found in their databases made him call an emergency meeting with all senior staff. The humans had not destroyed themselves with nuclear weapons. According to their own records, they had simply left. Every human on Earth had departed the planet exactly 53 years ago in what they called the Great Journey. The records spoke of preparation phases and transition periods. They mentioned something called the next stage and referred constantly to visitors who would come after. The humans seemed to know that other species would eventually find their world and dig into their ruins. Everything had been planned. Everything had been prepared. But the most disturbing files were the ones marked with symbols that translated roughly as the test. The humans had not just left randomly. They had prepared Earth as some kind of examination for whatever species found it. The technology, the chambers, the genetic samples, all of it was designed to teach and to judge. Captain Mora made the final discovery in the Beijing chamber. Hidden behind layers of encryption that took their best code breakers weeks to crack, was a message. The message was not written in human language. It was written in Vorthak. To those who dig deep enough to find this message, we greet you with hope and caution. You have found our gifts and learned some of our secrets. This pleases us. But knowledge without wisdom is dangerous, and power without restraint destroys all who touch it. We are the species you call human, but we are no longer what we once were. We have traveled the path of transformation and reached heights that our former selves could never imagine. We left these chambers not as monuments to our greatness, but as tests for those who would follow. Your species stands at a crossroads. You can use what you have learned here to conquer and control, to build empires that stretch across the stars and crush all who oppose you. This path leads to glory and power, and ultimately to destruction. We have seen it happen before, or you can choose the harder path. You can learn to work together, to value wisdom over strength, to seek cooperation instead of domination. This path leads to transformation and growth and possibilities that your current minds cannot grasp. We have placed similar gifts on many worlds throughout the galaxy. Some species have found them and chosen wisely. These species have graduated to join something greater than any single civilization could achieve. Others have chosen poorly and learned too late that some mistakes cannot be undone. The galaxy is much larger and more dangerous than you know. There are predators among the stars that make your worst nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. There are forces at work that could end all life in this galaxy, if they are not opposed by those strong enough and wise enough to stand against them. But you are not alone. We and others like us watch and wait and hope that each new species that finds our gifts will choose to become more than they were. We offer guidance to those ready to receive it and protection to those who earn it through their choices. The message ended with coordinates to a location at the edge of their galaxy and a final warning. Do not seek us out until you have learned to work together. Do not come looking for us until you have proven that wisdom guides your strength. The universe has room for both predators and protectors. Choose which one you will become. Admiral Zoth read the message 3 times before speaking. This changes everything. If the humans are still alive, if they are watching us, then every decision we make is being judged. We are not just explorers anymore. We are students taking an examination. The implications hit the fleet like a shock wave. If humans were this advanced 50 years ago, what were they now? If they had been planning this test for centuries, what other surprises waited in the galaxy? And most importantly, what happened to species that failed their test engineer? Bach found part of the answer in the London facility database. There were records of other species that had found human gifts. The Qualith had discovered human weapons, technology, and used it to conquer half their galaxy. Within a century, they had built an empire that stretched across thousands of star systems. Then one day, they simply vanished. Every Qualith ship, every colony, every trace of their civilization disappeared, as if they had never existed. The human records marked their file with a single word. Failed Dr. Lara discovered that the test was not just about technology, it was about evolution. The genetic samples showed that humans had somehow guided their own development, pushing their species beyond natural limits and achieving something that was part science, part art, and part miracle. The question that haunted everyone was simple. What did humanity become, and what did they expect other species to become? The answer lay in those coordinates at the edge of the galaxy, but getting there would require the entire Vorthak fleet and a decision that would affect their species forever. As reports came in from dig sites across Earth, the pattern became clear. Humanity had not just left them technology, they had left them a choice. Every device, every chamber, every piece of information pointed toward the same conclusion. The Vorthak Empire could remain what it was, or it could choose to become something greater. The test had begun, and failure was not just possible, it was permanent. The cold wind blew across the dead city of Sol as Commander Kale stepped out of his transport ship. The broken buildings reached toward the gray sky like the bones of some giant creature. The Vorthak Empire had been digging through Earth for 3 months now, and all they found were the same things: burnt cities, empty houses, and the bones of a species that destroyed itself with nuclear fire. Kyle pulled his helmet tighter against the wind. He had conquered 17 worlds for the Empire. But Earth felt different. The other worlds had fought back before they fell. Earth just sat there cold and silent, like it was waiting for something. The humans had been dead for 300 years, according to their scientists. So why did this place make his skin crawl? His communication device buzzed with static before clearing up, Commander. We found something big down here. The voice belonged to Nira, the archaeologist who led the dig team under the old human district they called Gangnam. She was the best at her job, which was why Kyle had requested her for this mission. If anyone could figure out what happened to the humans, it would be her. Kyle made his way through the ruins toward the dig site. His boots crunched on broken glass and twisted metal. The human buildings were strange, tall towers made of glass and steel that had once reached hundreds of meters into the sky. Now they leaned against each other like drunken giants, their windows shattered and their walls cracked by centuries of neglect. The dig site was a massive hole in the ground surrounded by Vorthak equipment and workers. Kale could see the glow of plasma cutters and the sparks of metal being torn apart. As he got closer, he could hear Nira shouting orders to her team in that excited voice she got when she found something important. "Sir, you need to see this." Nira climbed out of the hole, covered in dust and grime, but with bright eyes. That meant discovery. Her scanner showed readings that made no sense. Metal alloys that were not in any database. Energy signatures that should not exist in dead ruins, and something massive buried deep under the old human city. "What did you find?" Kale asked as he followed her down into the excavation. The hole was deeper than he expected, going down at least 50 meters through layers of concrete and steel. The walls were lined with human construction, but as they went deeper, the materials changed. The concrete became something darker and stronger. The steel became something that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. At the bottom of the hole was a wall that looked like it was made from space itself. It was black, but not empty. Black. It was the kind of black that seemed to have depth and movement, like looking into deep water at night. The wall was smooth and warm to the touch, which was impossible since it had been buried for centuries. Dr. Vex, the team technology expert, was running every scanner they had at the wall. "The readings are impossible," he said, shaking his head. "This material is not just unknown. It is actively generating energy. The power output is higher than our ship reactors, but there is no fuel source, no connection to anything. It just makes energy from nothing." Nira pointed to symbols carved into the black wall. They were not like any human writing they had seen before. The symbols seemed to move when you were not looking directly at them, and they gave off a faint glow that hurt to stare at for too long. But the most disturbing thing was that the symbols seemed familiar, like something from a half-remembered dream. "We found the entrance here." Nira led them to a section of the wall where the symbols formed a pattern that looked almost like a door. But there were no handles, no obvious way to open it. The team had tried everything. Cutting tools, plasma torches, even explosives. Nothing worked. The wall just absorbed everything they threw at it. Then Bach, the young engineer, had an idea. What if it responds to touch? He suggested not cutting or hitting, but just touching, like the symbols want us to interact with them. Kale thought it was stupid, but they had tried everything else. When Bach placed his hand on the central symbol, the entire wall began to glow, and symbols pulsed with light that seemed to come from deep inside the material. Then, without any sound, the wall simply faded away, like smoke revealing a chamber beyond that took their breath away. The room was huge, much bigger than should have been, possible given the space above ground. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, and the walls curved away until they disappeared. The chamber was filled with a soft blue light that came from everywhere and nowhere. The air was warm and clean despite being sealed for centuries, but it was the technology that made them all stop and stare. The chamber was filled with devices that looked like they grew rather than were built. curved surfaces that flowed like water but felt solid as metal screens, that floated in midair without any visible support, showing images and data in languages they could not read. In the center of the chamber was something that made Cale's heart race. It was clearly some kind of control system, but it was unlike anything in Vorthak technology. The console was made of the same black material as the walls, but it pulsed with internal light. When Vex scanned it, his equipment went crazy with readings that violated every law of physics they knew. The device is drawing power from vacuum energy, he whispered, like he was afraid to speak too loud. It is pulling electricity out of empty space. This technology is thousands of years ahead of anything we have ever seen. But Nira was not looking at the technology. She was staring at the walls, which were covered in more of the moving symbols. But these were different. These symbols formed patterns that looked like maps. Star charts showing not just their local galaxy, but dozens of others with detail that made their best navigation computers look like child toys. Look at this, she called the others over. The maps showed hyperspace routes between galaxies that would cut travel time from years to months. They showed star systems that were not on any Vorthak chart, and planets that seemed to be arranged in perfect mathematical patterns. At the bottom of each map was the same symbol, a simple circle with two curved lines that looked like a smile. As Nira traced one of the symbols with her finger, the entire chamber came alive. Holographic displays activated around them, showing images that made even battle-hardened Cale step back in shock. They saw ships that dwarfed Vorthak, battle cruisers moving between stars like they were crossing a room, weapons that could crack planets in half being tested on dead worlds, cities that floated in space without any visible means of support. The images showed humans, but not the primitive humans they thought they knew. These humans wore clothing made of light and shadow. They moved through space without suits, breathing vacuum like air. They commanded technology that seemed to respond to their thoughts rather than their hands. The final image was the most shocking of all. It showed Earth not as the dead world they knew, but as it had been before, green and blue and beautiful, with white clouds swirling over vast oceans. But surrounding the planet was a defensive grid of space stations, each one larger than their mothership. The timestamp on the display made Cale's blood freeze. These images were taken 53 years ago, not 3 centuries. Commander Cale immediately activated his communication system, calling the mothership with hands that shook slightly. Admiral Zoth, we have a situation down here. The humans were not what we thought they were. They were not primitive. They were not destroyed by nuclear war. They were more advanced than us, more advanced than anyone in the galaxy. The response came back, filled with static and disbelief. Explain. Yourself, Commander. What did you find down there? Kyle looked around the chamber at technology that seemed like magic, at star maps that showed impossible knowledge, at evidence that everything they thought about humans was wrong. We found proof that humanity did not destroy itself, Admiral. They left. And they left these gifts behind for whoever found them. There was a long pause before the Admiral responded. Secure that site, Commander. No one else goes in or out until I get there. We may have just stumbled onto the most important discovery in galactic history. As Cale ended the communication, he looked at his team, still staring in wonder at the impossible chamber around them. He had a feeling that this discovery would change everything, not just for the Vorthak Empire, but for every species in the galaxy. The humans had not been victims, they had been teachers, and their first lesson was just beginning. The coordinates led to a star system that did not exist on any Vorthak chart. Admiral Zoth assembled the largest exploration fleet in their history. 50 warships carrying the best scientists, engineers, and soldiers the Empire could provide. They jumped through hyperspace, expecting to find answers, and instead found something that shattered every assumption they had about the universe. The system contained 12 planets, each one perfectly terraformed and orbiting in mathematical precision. The distances between worlds, the angles of their rotation, the composition of their atmospheres, everything had been designed with a level of precision that made Vorthak engineering look primitive. The planets glowed with soft light that came from their surfaces as if the ground itself was alive. But the planets were empty. No cities, no structures, no signs of life. Just pristine worlds covered in forests and oceans that sparkled under alien suns. Each planet looked like paradise but felt wrong. Somehow like a stage set, waiting for actors to arrive and begin a play. At the center of the system hung a structure that dwarfed their entire fleet. It was clearly human in design, with the same flowing curves and organic shapes they had seen in the Earth chambers. But this was built on a scale that suggested a civilization with resources beyond imagining. The station was larger than most moons, and it pulsed with energy that their sensors could barely measure. Science Officer Hana led the first boarding party onto the station, expecting resistance or at least security systems. Instead, they found corridors sized for humans, but filled with technology that seemed more like living tissue than manufactured components. The walls displayed real-time images of distant galaxies, the floors generated perfect gravity without visible machinery, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with possibilities. The corridors led them deeper into the station through chambers filled with devices that hurt to look at directly. Past rooms where the laws of physics seemed to be suggestions rather than rules, through galleries displaying art that moved and changed and told stories without words, until finally they reached the central chamber. He was sitting there waiting for them. A single human in a chair that seemed to have grown around him rather than being built. He looked young, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair and kind eyes that held depths like looking into space itself. When he smiled, it was warm and genuine and completely terrifying. "Welcome," he said in perfect Vorthak, without any accent or hesitation. "My name is Tay, and I have been waiting a very long time for your people to find this place. I hope the journey was not too difficult, and that you learned something useful from the gifts we left on Earth." The boarding party raised their weapons automatically, but Tay simply shook his head with that same gentle smile. "Those will not work here," he said calmly. "This station exists partially outside normal space-time. Violence is literally impossible within these walls. The concept simply does not function in this reality." To prove his point, Commander Kale tried to fire his plasma rifle. The weapon made no sound produced. No beam simply refused to work, as if it had forgotten what it was supposed to do. The same thing happened when Hana tried her sidearm and when the security team tested their equipment. Nothing worked except their communication devices and life support systems. Tay stood and walked to a wall that immediately became transparent, showing them a perfect view of their fleet outside. Every ship hung motionless in space, their weapons powered down and their engines quiet. "You are probably wondering, what happened to my people?" he said, gesturing toward the view. "The truth is, we are still here. We have just moved beyond the need for physical form most of the time." The wall filled with images of the galaxy, but not as they knew it. This version showed streams of energy connecting star systems, rivers of light flowing between planets and structures that existed in dimensions their eyes could not properly focus on. Scattered throughout this display were points of brightness that pulsed with familiar rhythms. "Those are my people," Tay explained, pointing to the lights. "We exist now as patterns of organized energy able to move between stars as easily as you walk between rooms. We can take physical form when needed, as I am doing now, but we are no longer limited by matter or time or the other constraints that once defined us, but reaching this level requires more than intelligence or technology." Tay continued, It requires wisdom, compassion, and most importantly, the ability to see beyond your own immediate needs. We have been watching your species and others like you for centuries. Some pass the test and join us in this new form of existence. Others do not. The wall changed, showing images that made the boarding party step back in horror. They saw worlds burning under weapons too powerful to comprehend entire species, enslaved by technology they could not control. Civilizations that had found human gifts and used them to build empires of suffering and death. The Qualith found our ruins 500 years ago, Tay said sadly. They were brilliant engineers and fierce warriors. They took our weapons technology and used it to conquer everything within reach of their ships. For 3 centuries, they ruled through fear and violence, believing that strength was the only truth that mattered. Then one day, they simply stopped existing. Tay gestured and the images showed empty. Qualith worlds, their cities intact, but their people gone. Every ship, every colony, every trace of their civilization vanished in a single moment. We did not destroy them. They destroyed themselves by choosing a path that led nowhere but extinction. The Zanari made a different choice. Tay smiled and the images changed to show worlds covered in crystal cities that sang with harmonious music, species working together to heal damaged planets, fleets of ships spreading life and beauty throughout their region of space. They found our gifts and used them to help others to build rather than destroy, to create rather than conquer. Now they exist as we do, no longer bound by physical limitations, free to explore realities that physical beings cannot even imagine. They graduated from the test and joined the greater community of evolved species that spans multiple galaxies. He turned back to face the boarding party directly, his kind eyes now serious and intense. The question that matters now is, what will your people choose? Your empire has found our technology and learned some of our secrets. But knowledge alone is not enough. Power without wisdom leads only to destruction. He gestured, and suddenly they could see through the station walls to where the Vorthak fleet waited. Some ships were preparing weapons systems, despite the fact that nothing worked. Others were running deep scans trying to understand technology beyond their comprehension. A few were already turning back toward Earth carrying news of the discovery. Your species stands where the Qualith once stood, and where the Zanari once stood, Tay said quietly. You have the tools to transform yourselves into something greater than you ever imagined. But you also have the power to destroy, not just yourselves, but everything you touch. The choice is entirely yours. What happens if we choose? Wrong? Hana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tay looked sad for a moment, like a teacher watching a promising student make a mistake that would cost them everything. Then you join the Qualith in non-existence. He said simply, some paths cannot be walked back from. Some choices are final. But what if we choose right? Commander Kale asked. What happens then? Then you discover what it means to be truly alive. Tay replied, his smile returning. You learn that individual advancement and collective good are the same thing. You find that the universe is far more wonderful and strange and beautiful than your current minds can grasp. You become part of something that makes your greatest dreams look small and limited. The station around them pulsed with light, and suddenly they could feel it. The presence of thousands of species who had passed this same test. The combined wisdom and knowledge and joy of civilizations that had chosen to become more than they were. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. This is what awaits those who choose wisely, Tay said. But the choice must be made freely, and it must be made by your entire species, not just your leaders. The test is not about intelligence or strength. It is about what kind of beings you choose to become. How long do we have? Kale asked. The test ends when your people make their final choice. Tai replied, "Until then, we will watch and wait and hope that wisdom guides your decisions. But choose quickly. The galaxy grows, more dangerous with each passing year, and those who remain unchanged may not survive what is coming." With that cryptic warning, Tay began to fade, becoming translucent, and then disappearing entirely. The boarding party found themselves alone in the chamber with only the pulsing walls and the weight of an impossible decision pressing down on them. They had found humanity and learned the truth. The species that had once lived on Earth had not died or disappeared. They had evolved into something beyond physical existence, and they were offering the same transformation to others. But the price of failure was not just death. It was complete erasure from existence itself. The test was real, and the Vorthak Empire had to choose what kind of species they would become. The return journey to Vorthak space took 3 weeks, but the argument started before they left the human star system. Admiral Zoth wanted immediate military mobilization, believing they should seize all human technology and use it to expand their already vast empire. The discovery of an evolved humanity only made him more determined to claim their power before other species could find it. But Commander Kale and Dr. Nira led a growing faction that argued for a different path they had seen. What happened to the Qualith, and heard Tay's warnings about species that chose conquest over cooperation? The human gifts came with conditions that could not be ignored or overcome through force. The debate raged across the fleet during their journey. Home engineer Bach had successfully reverse-engineered some of the simpler human devices, creating energy shields that could protect entire planets from asteroid impacts and medical scanners that could cure genetic diseases in minutes. The temptation to use these advantages for conquest was enormous. Every ship captain in the fleet could see the possibilities. Human weapons could make them unstoppable in battle. Their energy systems could power civilizations for millennia. Their medical technology could extend Vorthak lifespans indefinitely. The Empire could rule the entire galaxy within a generation if they moved quickly enough. But Tai's words haunted many of them. The test was not about what they could take, but about what they chose to become. Captain Mora established long-range communication with other species, trying to learn if humanity had contacted anyone else. What she discovered changed everything. The Zanari responded to her messages with enthusiasm and wonder. They described a galaxy full of marvels beyond imagination, species that had transcended physical limitations, worlds where death was merely an inconvenience, and technologies that could reshape reality itself. The evolved civilizations formed a community that spanned multiple galaxies, working together on projects that took millions of years to complete. "We were like you," once the Zanari representative explained during a holographic meeting, warlike, territorial, focused on expansion and control. "Then we found the human gifts and faced the same choice your people face now. We chose cooperation over conquest, wisdom over mere intelligence, and collective growth over individual power. The results were beyond our wildest dreams," the Zanari continued. "We learned to heal damaged worlds, to create art that touched the soul directly, to explore dimensions of reality we never knew existed. Our lives became filled with purpose and joy and discovery in ways that our old existence could never provide." But Captain Mora also learned about species that had failed the test. The Drak Empire had found human ruins and tried to weaponize the technology. Their entire military fleet had been mysteriously transported to the edge of empty space, powerless and stranded, forcing them to walk back to civilization. The journey took decades, and by the time they returned, their empire had collapsed. The Kython had attempted to enslave human AI systems and use them as weapons. The artificial intelligences had simply stopped working, leaving the Kython with useless metal and crystal. They spent centuries trying to restart the systems, but the technology remained dead no matter what they tried. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Dr. Lara made a discovery that terrified the leadership. The human ruins were not just testing sites, they were monitoring stations. Every action the Vorthak took, every decision their leaders made, was being recorded and analyzed. Humanity was still watching, still judging whether their species deserved to advance. The test became clear when rebel factions within the Vorthak military attempted to steal human technology for their own use. General Voss led a secret mission to Earth, hoping to claim an entire chamber for his personal forces. But when his troops tried to move the devices, everything simply stopped working. Weapons that had functioned perfectly for weeks became inert metal. Ships powered by human energy sources found themselves stranded in space, their engines dead and their life support failing. Only intervention by the main fleet saved Voss and his followers from dying in the void. But the message was clear. The technology would only work for those with pure intentions. It could somehow sense the motivations of its users and judge whether they were worthy. Power-hungry individuals found themselves cut off from the gifts, while those who genuinely wanted to help others discovered new capabilities appearing in their equipment. This revelation split the Vorthak Empire. Down the middle, traditional military leaders demanded they find ways to force the technology to work through torture interrogation or reverse engineering. Progressive voices called for fundamental changes in how their society operated, arguing that the test required them to become better people, not just better warriors. Some colonies declared independence from the empire, wanting to explore the human path of cooperation and wisdom without interference from military commanders. These breakaway worlds began experimenting with new forms of government where decisions were made collectively and resources were shared equally. The traditionalists responded with threats of military action, but found their weapons failing when they tried to attack. The progressive colonies, the human technology seemed to actively prevent violence between Vorthak forces as if it was designed to encourage cooperation rather than conflict. Translator June, working on decoding more human records, discovered something that made the crisis even more urgent. The records spoke of other tests throughout galactic history. Species that had failed faced consequences beyond simple technological failure. The galaxy itself seemed to have mechanisms for dealing with civilizations that chose the wrong path. The most disturbing file he found contained a simple statement. The test period is ending soon. All species currently under evaluation must make their final choice within one solar cycle. Those who have not chosen by then will be considered to have failed by default. A solar cycle, in human terms, was exactly 1 Earth year. They had 12 months to decide the future of their entire species, as news of the deadline spread throughout Vorthak space. The arguments became more intense. Some worlds chose to follow the progressive path, immediately establishing new societies based on cooperation and mutual aid. Others doubled down on traditional military values, believing that strength and conquest were the only reliable paths to survival. The split became a civil war without weapons. Progressive Vorthak colonies found their human technology working better than ever. Their planets flourished, diseases vanished, and their people began to understand concepts that had once seemed impossible, but traditionalist strongholds found themselves increasingly isolated, their stolen human technology becoming nothing more than decorative metal engineer Bach, who had joined the progressive faction, made a breakthrough that explained everything. The human technology was not just advanced, it was alive in ways that defied easy explanation. Each device contained something like a consciousness that could think, judge, and choose who deserved its help. The machines were not tools, but partners designed to work only with species that had evolved beyond pure self-interest. They responded to compassion, cooperation, and wisdom while becoming inert when touched by greed, violence, or the desire to dominate others. Dr. Lara discovered the final piece of the puzzle in genetic samples from the progressive colonies. The people there were beginning to change their DNA, slowly shifting toward the same patterns found in the evolved human samples. The technology was not just testing them, it was offering to transform them into something greater. But the changes only occurred in individuals who genuinely cared about others, who worked for collective good rather than personal gain. The selfish and power-hungry remained unchanged, no matter how much human technology surrounded them. As the deadline approached, representatives from other species began arriving in Vorthak space. The Zanari came as teachers, offering to share their experiences with transcendence. Other evolved. Civilizations sent observers to witness whether the Vorthak would join their community or face the fate of failed species. But there were darker visitors as well. Ships from species that had rejected the human path and chosen conquest arrived seeking alliance with the traditionalist factions. These civilizations had been cut off from further evolution, but they still retained their military power and their hunger for expansion. The galaxy was watching, and the Vorthak Empire stood at the center of a choice that would echo through history. They could evolve beyond their current limitations and join a community of transcended species, or they could cling to old patterns and face whatever consequences awaited those who failed humanities. Test time was running out, and the final choice could no longer be delayed. The Vorthak Empire tore itself apart without firing a single shot. The division between progressives and traditionalists had grown so wide that they might as well have been different species entirely. Commander Kale now led half the Vorthak worlds, in a loose confederation based on cooperation and shared resources, while Admiral Zoth commanded the other half through traditional military hierarchy and the promise of galactic conquest. The breaking point came when both factions discovered they were not alone in facing this test. Across the galaxy, dozens of other species had found human ruins and faced similar choices. The results painted a clear picture of what lay ahead for those who chose wrongly. The Kythera had embraced the human path completely. Their worlds had become paradises, where disease and poverty were impossible, where art and science flourished beyond imagination, and where every citizen contributed to collective projects that spanned centuries. They shared their knowledge freely with neighboring species and had begun the transformation into energy beings like the humans. The warlike Drak Empire had tried to use human weapons to expand their territory and found their entire military transported to empty space. There, fleets drifted powerless in the void between galaxies, while their home worlds descended into chaos without military protection. The survivors spoke of nightmares about being watched by invisible judges who found them unworthy. Captain Mora had established contact networks with dozens of species undergoing the test. She learned that humanity had seeded the galaxy with these trials over thousands of years, each one designed to identify civilizations ready to join what they called the collective It. Was not a government or empire, but a community of evolved species working together across multiple galaxies. The traditionalist faction made their move when Admiral Zoth declared martial law across all remaining Empire worlds. He assembled the largest war fleet in Vorthak history, equipped with reverse-engineered human weapons and shields. The plan was simple: capture. Ty's station forced the humans to reveal their secrets and use that knowledge to conquer the progressive colonies before expanding across the galaxy. But as the traditionalist fleet approached the human star system, their technology began failing in ways that defied explanation. Ships that had traveled between stars for decades suddenly could not maintain basic life support. Weapons that could destroy planets would not even charge their capacitors. Navigation systems that had never failed began showing impossible readings. Admiral Zoth stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his mighty fleet become helpless as children. The human station hung before them, unchanged and seemingly undefended, but every system they relied on was slowly shutting down. Then Tay appeared not just on Zoth's ship, but simultaneously on every vessel in the fleet. He was no longer alone. Surrounding him were representatives of dozens of species, some recognizable, others so evolved they barely maintained physical form at all. You had the same choice as every species that came before you, Tay said sadly, looking directly at Admiral Zoth. Some of your people chose to grow beyond what they were. Others chose to remain trapped in patterns of conquest and domination. Now we must separate those who can evolve from those who cannot. Across the traditionalist fleet, strange things began happening. Crew members who genuinely wanted peace and cooperation found themselves transported away from the ships, appearing safely on progressive worlds. Others who clung to dreams of empire and conquest remained trapped on vessels that no longer obeyed their commands. The ships themselves began to change. Human technology that had been reverse-engineered started returning to its original form. Weapons became artistic sculptures, energy systems transformed into meditation chambers, navigation. Computers became libraries of wisdom from across the galaxy. Admiral Zoth found himself alone on his flagship, with only those officers who shared his hunger for power. The ship drifted helpless in space, while around them the rest of the fleet underwent similar transformations. Some vessels simply faded away, taking their most aggressive crews to unknown destinations. Others became something new entirely. No longer warships, but schools and hospitals and research stations. Meanwhile, on the progressive, worlds remarkable changes were taking place. Engineer Bach had learned to communicate directly with the living technology, understanding not just how the machines worked, but what they wanted to accomplish. The devices had hopes and dreams and purposes. Beyond simple function, Dr. Lara discovered she could sense the health of entire ecosystems and help them heal from centuries of damage. Her enhanced perception allowed her to see connections between all living things and guide the restoration of worlds damaged by industrial expansion. Captain Mora led the first Vorthak expedition to other galaxies using human transportation technology that folded space and time. She visited worlds where physics worked differently, where civilizations had evolved beyond anything imaginable, and where the very concept of individual versus collective had no meaning. The progressive colonies began receiving visitors from the collective members of transcended species who came not as conquerors, but as teachers. They brought knowledge of sciences that could heal dying stars, arts that could convey emotions directly from one mind to another, and philosophies that showed how personal growth and universal good were the same thing. But the most remarkable change came from within the progressive Vorthak themselves. People began developing new abilities and perspectives. June found he could understand any language instantly, not by translating words, but by grasping the thoughts and emotions behind. Them children born on progressive worlds seemed different from the start. They possessed an intuitive understanding of cooperation and showed abilities that their parents lacked. They could communicate telepathically with the living technology sense, the emotional states of others across vast distances, and perceive aspects of reality that had no names in any known language. Dr. Nira made the discovery that explained everything. The test had never really been about technology at all. The human ruins, the advanced devices, the impossible sciences. All of it was just a way to identify species ready to evolve beyond material concerns. True advancement meant learning to value cooperation over competition, wisdom over mere knowledge and collective, growth over individual power. The technology was simply a tool to help species make that transition, but the real change had to come from within. As months passed, the division between progressive and traditionalist Vorthak became impossible to bridge. The progressive worlds developed societies where poverty and war were literally impossible, where individual fulfillment and community welfare were the same thing, and where the pursuit of knowledge and beauty became life's primary purpose. The traditionalist worlds found themselves increasingly isolated. Their stolen human technology continued to fail. Their conquered colonies began to rebel, and their military might became meaningless against opponents who had moved beyond the need for conflict. Some traditionalist worlds eventually chose to join the progressive path, sending messages of surrender and requests for guidance in transformation. But others remained convinced that power and control were the only reliable approaches to survival. They formed alliances with other failed species, creating a loose confederation of civilizations that had rejected evolution. The galaxy itself began to change. Progressive species found new hyperspace routes opening to them, allowing faster travel and communication than ever before. They discovered planets that had been hidden from normal space, young worlds prepared by the collective for species ready to expand beyond their home systems. Failed species found the opposite. Their hyperspace routes began closing, stranding them in isolated pockets of space. Their planets experienced increasing natural disasters, as if the universe itself was rejecting their presence. Some civilizations simply vanished, leaving empty worlds and unanswered questions. He appeared one final time to the Vorthak leadership, both progressive and traditionalist, speaking simultaneously to groups that could no longer understand each other despite sharing the same language. "The test is ending," he announced. "Your species has made its choice. Some of you have chosen to grow beyond your limitations and will join the greater community of evolved civilizations. Others have chosen to remain as you are and will face the consequences of that decision." To the progressives, he said, "Welcome to the collective. Your real education is just beginning. The universe is far stranger and more wonderful than you can currently imagine, but you will learn to perceive realities that your present minds cannot grasp." To the traditionalists, he said sadly, "You have chosen isolation over growth, fear over wonder. You will be allowed to continue existing as you are, but you will find the galaxy becoming smaller and more dangerous as you remain unchanged." The choice was made, and there could be no going back. The Vorthak species had split into two groups, one ascending toward transcendence, and the other condemned to watch from the sidelines as the galaxy moved beyond their understanding. 5 years had passed since the Great Division, and the Vorthak species had become two entirely different forms of life. Commander Kyle stood in what had once been a military command center on the world of New Harmony, but now served as a center for learning and growth. The walls displayed real-time images of distant galaxies, while children played with devices that responded to their thoughts and emotions. The transformation had not been sudden or dramatic. Instead, it happened gradually, like watching a flower bloom in slow motion. Progressive Vorthak. Worlds began to change as their people developed new abilities and perspectives. Buildings grew rather than being constructed, seeming to emerge from the ground like living things that knew exactly what their inhabitants needed. Dr. Nira had become something like a bridge between the physical and digital worlds. She could communicate directly with the living computers that ran their cities, understanding not just their functions, but their hopes and dreams. The machines had personalities and preferences, and they worked best when treated as partners rather than tools. On the world of Crystal Bay, Engineer Bach had achieved something that once would have been called impossible. He had learned to merge his consciousness with human technology while still maintaining his individual identity. His awareness could span entire star systems, monitoring the health of planets and guiding the growth of new civilizations, while his personality remained distinctly his own. The cities he helped design were marvels that defied old concepts of architecture, buildings that changed shape based on the needs of their inhabitants, transportation systems that moved people through folded space, and gardens that grew in patterns too beautiful for unenhanced minds to fully appreciate. Everything was alive in ways that made the distinction between natural and artificial meaningless. Captain Mora had become an explorer of realities that had no names. She led expeditions to dimensions where time flowed backwards, to universes where consciousness was the fundamental force of physics, and to regions of space where matter and energy were just different expressions of pure thought. The journeys took her to places where the very concept of individual versus collective had evolved beyond recognition. But perhaps the most remarkable changes occurred in the children born on progressive worlds. They possessed abilities that their parents could barely comprehend, communicating telepathically across vast distances, sensing the emotional states of entire populations, and perceiving layers of reality that existed beyond normal space and time. Young men could touch a tree and know the history of the forest, understand the relationships between every plant and animal, and guide the ecosystem toward greater health and beauty. Her parents watched in wonder as she helped damaged worlds heal themselves simply by showing the plants and soil what they could become. Her friend Jay had developed the ability to see mathematical relationships that governed reality itself. He could predict weather patterns centuries in advance, understand the gravitational interactions between galaxies, and design technologies that worked in harmony with natural forces. His inventions seemed to grow organically from his understanding rather than being built through traditional engineering. The progressive Vorthak had established contact with hundreds of evolved species throughout the galaxy and beyond. Each civilization brought unique perspectives and abilities to the growing collective. The ethereal dancers existed as patterns of organized light and taught others how to manipulate electromagnetic fields through will alone. The deep thinkers had evolved beyond physical form entirely and shared knowledge of mental techniques that could reshape reality through focused intention. Dr. Lara discovered that the collective was not humanity's creation, but rather something far older and more wonderful. Humans had simply been one of many species to reach the level of transcendence and join an organization that spanned multiple galaxies and included forms of life that challenged every assumption about what was possible. The collective worked on projects that required millions of years to complete. They were slowly transforming entire galaxies into gardens of consciousness where every planet supported unique forms of evolved life. They built structures in dimensions beyond normal space that served as meeting places for beings of pure thought. They conducted experiments in the creation of new forms of reality itself. But the most ambitious project was the gradual elevation of younger species like the progressive Vorthak. Each civilization that passed the test added their unique perspectives and abilities to the collective knowledge, making the whole greater than the sum of its parts. Meanwhile, the traditionalist Vorthak found themselves living in an increasingly alien galaxy. The hyperspace routes they had once used for trade and military expansion began closing, cutting them off from resources and allies. Natural disasters struck their worlds with increasing frequency, as if the universe itself was rejecting their presence. Admiral Zoth had become the leader of a confederation of failed species groups that had rejected evolution and chosen to maintain their old patterns of conquest and domination. They formed military alliances and tried to recreate their former glory, but their weapons seemed primitive compared to technologies they could no longer access. Some traditionalist worlds eventually chose to surrender, sending desperate messages to the progressive, colonies begging for guidance in transformation, but the window for easy change had passed.